Going on, folks? Painless. Hitting you over the head with another video. Now, you may be wondering why I have my camera pointed to this trailer full of junk. And as you see the title of the video, it kind of goes hand in hand with what I'm going to talk about. Now, you see that trailer full of junk, scrap metal? We could probably get about maybe about $300 for all that scrap metal right there. Now, some people look at that as, it is useless. You got some water heaters over there. I'm not sure if they're serviceable. But, yeah, you can probably get about $300 for all that junk right there. Which leads me to the focal point of my video. I said about Trump and the outrage that many of us as black folk, engage in when we talk about Trump. And as I've heard others say about Trump, he is obviously, if you sit down and pay attention and remove emotion from your psyche concerning what he does on a daily basis, you'll see that he's merely catering to a specific base, that he is pandering to them. And us as black folks, we get so emotional. And I've said, we vote like we are in a classroom voting for, or at a school voting for a class president. We vote like we're going to see who's going to take names in the class while the teacher leaves for 15 minutes. Popularity. And we should know that this is not how politics works. We see this with George Bush, who won through electoral college. And I've explained how the electoral college works, and I'm not going to do that. But we need to be re-educated. Americans need to be re-educated in how politics works. It's not a popularity contest. It's about honing in on your base. And that's what Trump has done. He has captivated and solidified a base which will give him unwavering, selfless support. And those people are going to show up at the polls again in 2020. And Trump will be your president for another 4 years. That's quote me on it. And his rhetoric concerning Elijah Cummings in Baltimore is dead on. If you look at the city of Baltimore, it is, in general, overall, and I know some brothers from Baltimore, they could probably attest to this. They work the streets of Baltimore every day. And they've told me about all the chaos, all the things that are going on in the city of Baltimore. And it is a third world country in terms of living conditions, standards. And this is what you see in a lot of major black-ran cities, where you have a black police chief, mostly black city council. We saw what happened to Kwame Kilpatrick up in Detroit a couple years ago. Now, do white people do it too? Yeah. But see, that excuse is becoming mute. One has to just really take responsibility for their own actions. Now, Elijah Cummings voted for one of the toughest anti-drug laws that was a detriment to young black men in the 80s. Because paint this or picture this. You a city councilman in the 80s in cities like Chicago, Detroit, New York City, especially New York City, that had a heroin epidemic prior to the crack epidemic. And you an ombudsman or something like that, and you trying to get to your office and you stepping over Willie the Wino, you dodging women on their knees, servicing guys for money for heroin or crack. You're passing mounds of garbage. You're seeing stuff like this on city streets every day. Those black leaders were desperate and they asked the Congress, hey, we got to do something about this. So they passed, and this the whole crack versus powder. Let me explain that real quick, because that becomes a rallying cry and something that a lot of pro-blacks love to talk about, crack versus powder. The thing about powder versus crack is the violence associated with crack. These white guys that were buying powder in kilos by the boatloads, for the most part, there was violence. Anytime you're dealing with an illegal underworld or a sector in terms of selling drugs or guns or things like that, there's going to be some forms of violence. But the level of violence that we saw on urban streets in the 80s and up into the late 90s, mid 90s, was very savage and chaotic compared to those white men that were buying powder cocaine. You see, you had a lot of guys that were gang wars and stuff like that. What I'm saying is the violence associated with the typical crack transaction was usually violent, where young kids were getting killed in crossfires of drug gangs on the streets. That dispels that myth about white men getting lighter sentences, because the violence wasn't as bad as it was during crack transactions. And then you have, again, with these leaders, these black caucus leaders that were practically begging for something to be done, and Reagan did it. Fast forward 10 years later, they wanted to backpedal, said it was racist. Now these same leaders of the black caucus who lobbied, practically begged to do something, years later, said it was racist. So what did Clinton do? He made it stiffer. He really didn't do anything. And you have black leadership support that as well. Now, what Trump said about Elijah Cummings is very telling. Because what really has he done for Baltimore? Think about it. And it goes hand in hand with what I said about black folks and president, and how we vote like it's like we voting valedictorian or something. The best thing you can do in terms of voting, in terms of politics, is deal with the people that you can reach out and touch, which is your local level, your state level. Me, Painless personally, I could care less who's in the White House. I could care less. But this is the mind that many Americans have. Not only black folks, but Americans have. But yeah, Trump, I don't think he's a racist. I think he's an opportunist. And I've said this years ago. He's an opportunist. And he knows how to incite. certain reactions. And us as black people, we're very emotional. We take things to heart. Our ability to discern is lacking. And this is what you have. So I have no qualms with what Donald Trump said because it's true. A lot of these old black leaders haven't done anything. And before you can say something about someone else, perhaps you can clean up your backyard. And to the quotes of only people who aren't human would live in places like that. And I heard a commentator on CNN say what Trump was really saying is black people that aren't human. Well, I don't think it's very human to walk up to somebody in broad daylight and blow their brains out at 2 in the afternoon on a Saturday, at 2 in the afternoon. I don't think it's human to engage in physical violence while holding your child. The baby dies from falling and cracking their skull. I don't think that's human. And that's just a couple of things. I think that's the so-called black community involves itself in a lot of inhumane activity that you don't see in other communities. And I'm just talking about black folks. Does this happen in other areas? Possibly, but to the level that it happens in the so-called black community is by far off the mark, off the chain, off the Richter scale. So, you know, I'm indifferent to what Trump does and says, but this fake outrage, like we don't know what's going on in the city of Baltimore, is laughable. Fake outrage.